successful cash printing empire that deserves a massive loan.
Which is, logically impossible. You cannot be both things at once.
You really can't. Yet today we're going to look at why that exact paradox is playing out in banks all over the country and, well, why it's getting business loans denied left and right. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Thanks. Yeah, it is a massive contradiction, honestly, and it really stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what the people holding the capital actually want to see before they hand it over.
Which perfectly brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Whether you're a business owner gearing up for a transition, or maybe a prospective buyer looking to acquire a company, or just, someone fascinated by the hidden mechanics of high-stakes financial decisions. We are opening up the black box of commercial underwriting.
Oh, for sure. It's a fascinating space.
It really is. We're pulling insights from a really comprehensive webinar by John Hendershot of Black Lake Advisory. It's titled, What Lenders Really Look For. And the overarching theme here is that getting a business funded is, well, it's a lot less about simple math. It's much more about psychology, behavior, and uncovering hidden operational chaos.
Yeah, and Hendershot does a brilliant job of dismantling the myths owners carry around. I mean, he frames this as a strategic look at business survival. It's not just about making the numbers look pretty on a spreadsheet, right? It's about demonstrating structural integrity so the lender feels safe.
Okay, let's unpack this misconception because the source points out that owners usually walk into a bank completely misaligned with the lender's mindset.
Completely misaligned, like they aren't even speaking the same language.
Right. The average owner assumes the bank is going to evaluate their assets. They want to show off their collateral. They point to the commercial real estate they own, their fleet of expensive equipment, their top-line sales revenue.
Or maybe they just slide their perfect 800 personal credit score across the mahogany desk and just expect an immediate approval.
Exactly. But why doesn't that work?
Well, it's entirely logical why an owner would think that way, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
We are all conditioned by consumer lending. I mean, if you go to buy a house or finance a car, your personal credit score and the value of that collateral are pretty much the entire conversation.
Because the bank knows that if you stop paying, they just take the house. It's a super simple equation.
Exactly. But commercial lending is an entirely different universe. Sophisticated lenders, they do not want your collateral. They really don't. They don't want to become a property manager, and they certainly don't want to figure out how to auction off your highly specialized manufacturing equipment.
I look at it kind of like trying to sell a used car. The owner of the car is standing in the driveway, pointing at the shiny new paint job, the custom rims, and the upgraded stereo system. They're saying, look at all these incredible assets.
Right, but the lender is playing the role of the mechanic in this scenario.
Yes, the mechanic doesn't care about the paint job. They're strictly looking under the hood for a rattling engine, a leaky transmission, fraying belts. They only care about whether this machine can reliably get down the road for the next 10 years without exploding.
That analogy hits the core of commercial underwriting perfectly. The lender is evaluating risk, specifically the reliability and durability of your cash flow. Hendershot anchors this concept with a great point, actually.
Oh, what was the quote?
He says, lenders are not trying to avoid making loans. Making loans is literally how they survive. What they are trying to avoid is unpredictable risk. So they do not need perfection, but they absolutely must have confidence.
They do not need perfection, but they do need confidence.
Oh.
Wow. That phrase really changes the objective, doesn't it?
It shifts the entire paradigm.
So if the lender is the mechanic looking under the hood, how do they mathematically measure that confidence? I mean, there has to be a hard metric they use to decide if the engine is sound.
Oh, there absolutely is. And it is the absolute foundation of commercial lending. It's a metric called the debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR. Everything revolves around this single calculation.
Okay, let's break down the math behind this magic number. What actually goes into the DSCR?
At its most basic level, you take your net operating income, so the actual cash the business generates from its normal operations, and you divide it by your total debt service.
Which is the total annual cost of the loan you're trying to get, right?
Yeah.
Including both principal and interest.
Exactly. The total debt burden for the year.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the mechanics of this. Let's use real numbers so it's easier to visualize. Say I want to buy a business, and the loan I need to pull that off is going to cost me $100,000 a year in payments. Does the business just need to generate $100,000 in profit to cover it?
No, definitely not. If it only generated $100,000, your DSCR would be exactly 1.0. You're making exactly enough to pay the bank, with 0 pennies left over. A lender will instantly reject that.
Oh, wow. Instantly.
Yeah, instantly. They require a buffer. The magic threshold in the commercial lending world is typically a minimum DSCR of 1.25x.
So the business has to earn at least 25% more than the loan payment.
Mm.
Okay, so using the numbers from Hendershot's example, if the proposed annual debt payment is $400,000, the business must generate at least $500,000 just to hit the absolute minimum,
Right, and if it generates 600,000, your DSCR is 1.50x.
which I assume makes the lender very happy.
Very happy. It represents a very comfortable margin of safety. That extra 25% or 50% is the lender's cushion for when reality inevitably strikes. Lenders know that spreadsheets are static, but, business is chaotic.
Right, like supply chain costs spike, or a key employee demands a massive raise, or, I don't know, a global pandemic hits.
Exactly. If the business is running at a 1.0 ratio, the first minor hiccup means the bank doesn't get paid.
Let me challenge that logic for a second, though. Specifically when we look at SBA loans, the Small Business Administration loans, these are incredibly common, especially for people buying small to mid-sized businesses. The entire purpose of an SBA loan is that it's backed by the federal government to reduce the risk for the lender.
Ah, yeah, the government-backed myth.
Right. So if Uncle Sam is sitting there providing a massive safety net, why is the bank still sweating so much over this 1.25x ratio? Like, why are they digging into my operational chaos if the government essentially guarantees the loan?
That assumption traps so many buyers and sellers.
Right.
People hear government-backed and just assume it means guaranteed approval, but the reality is quite different. The SBA does not actually lend the money.
Well, they don't.
Nope. The bank lends the money, and the SBA just provides a partial guarantee to the bank. The bank is usually still completely on the hook for 25% of the loan amount.
And 25% of a multi-million-dollar acquisition is still a massive financial hit.
It's a catastrophic hit for a local or regional bank. If a $3 million loan defaults, the bank is losing $750,000 of its own capital. Plus, dealing with a defaulted business loan is an administrative nightmare.
I can only imagine. Lawyers, paperwork.
Years of legal maneuvering, liquidating assets for pennies on the dollar, and tying up the bank's resources. So their underwriting remains fiercely comprehensive. They're still looking at 3+ years of historical cash flow. They are scrutinizing management stability. They want absolute proof the business can survive the transition.
Which brings us back to the cash flow itself and that wild paradox we touched on at the very beginning of the show. Proving cash flow sounds like it should be the easiest part of this whole process. You just open your books and point to the profit.
Right, you'd think so.
But this is where the owner's historical behavior actively works against them, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the classic conflict between tax strategy and financing strategy. It is fascinating to watch play out in real life.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you as a listener.
Mm.
As a business owner, your primary goal for years, maybe decades, is to work with your CPA to aggressively minimize your taxable income. You write off the car, you write off the meals, you accelerate depreciation on your equipment.
You do everything legally permissible to tell the IRS, look, I barely made any money this year, please don't tax me.
Right. But the day you decide to sell the business, or the day you need a massive loan to expand, you suddenly need to tell the bank that the business is a raging river of cash. It's like having two completely different resumes for the exact same job. One says you do nothing, and the other says you run the whole company.
What's fascinating here is that owners spend their entire careers optimizing for taxes, but lenders optimize for predictable, documented cash flow. You cannot retroactively change your strategy. Lenders rely heavily on documented financial reality, not the owner's verbal promises.
They don't just take your word for it.
Definitely not. They pull your last 3 years of business tax returns, your personal tax returns, and your internal profit and loss statements, and they compare them line by line.
So what happens when those documents inevitably tell completely different stories? Say the internal P&L shows a robust profit of $800,000, but the tax returns show a taxable income of only $50,000.
That inconsistency completely shatters the lender's trust. Hendershot makes it very clear that this kind of financial disorganization doesn't just result in getting a slightly smaller loan. It can kill the deal entirely.
Wow.
Yeah. Lenders operate on a very strict rule when faced with conflicting documents. They will always, universally, assume the worst version of the numbers is the true one.
The worst version is the true one. If we go back to the mechanic analogy, the owner is standing there pointing to their internal spreadsheet saying, I swear the engine is perfect. But the mechanic is looking at the tax return and seeing oil leaking all over the floor. The mechanic trusts the oil leak.
Great way to put it. And the owner's typical response to this oil leak is to try and explain it away using add backs.
Ah, add backs. This is where the creative accounting really shines. Let's explore the psychology here. What exactly are they doing?
Add backs are essentially an owner trying to bridge the massive gap between their depressed tax returns and their actual cash flow. They tell the lender, yes, my profit looks low on paper, but you need to add back all these expenses that aren't strictly necessary for the business.
I can imagine this gets ridiculous quickly. An owner might say, well, I leased a luxury SUV through the business and I paid for a country club membership. And, oh, I expensed a family trip to Florida as a team building retreat.
Oh.
So if you ignore all of that, I actually made a ton of money.
And lenders will scrutinize every single one of those claims under a microscope. Some add backs are legitimate, right? Like a one-time legal settlement. But when a lender sees a laundry list of aggressive, questionable add backs, like the Florida trip or paying a salary to a spouse who doesn't actually work there, it sends a very dangerous signal.
It tells the lender that the owner plays fast and loose with reality.
Precisely. It creates immediate concern about what else might be hidden or exaggerated. They want clarity, not confusion.
Let's look at the flip side for a moment. Let's say we have an owner who did everything right. Their books are clean, their tax returns perfectly match their P&Ls, and they don't have a ridiculous list of add backs. But they still get rejected by the loan committee. Why does that happen?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's because a single weakness rarely kills a deal on its own. It's the compounding effect of multiple risks. Lenders look at the entire ecosystem of the business, and they know that vulnerabilities in one area tend to trigger catastrophic failures in another.
The compounding effect. Let's bounce a few of these fatal combinations back and forth to see how they interact. The webinar highlights several scenarios where the dominoes just fall, one after another.
We'll think about the combination of poor bookkeeping and high customer concentration.
Customer concentration is a huge one. We're talking about a scenario where a single client makes up, what, 20, maybe 30% of the total revenue?
Yeah, lenders get incredibly nervous anytime a single customer accounts for more than 20% of revenue. The mechanism here is simple. If the business is sold or the founder steps away, that creates turbulence.
Right, because the new owner might raise prices, or maybe they just don't have the same golf course relationship with the key client.
Exactly. And if that one client gets offended and leaves, a quarter of the cash flow vanishes in a single afternoon.
Which instantly drags that DSCR metric we talked about earlier straight down. If 25% of the revenue disappears, the business might dip below a 1.0 ratio, meaning they literally cannot make the loan payment that month.
Now combine that customer concentration with owner dependency. The owner is the only person who holds the relationships. The owner is the only one who knows how to quote a job. The owner handles all the escalated complaints.
I see the domino effect clearly now. The owner sells the business and leaves. Because the owner was the sole point of contact, the key customer feels abandoned and takes their 30% chunk of revenue to a competitor. And because the bookkeeping was poor, the new management doesn't even realize they're bleeding cash until it's too late. The loan defaults.
Exactly. That specific combination of risks makes it impossible for a lender to confidently approve the capital.
But this raises a really practical question for you, the listener. Does a business need to be a flawless, perfectly oiled machine before an owner even thinks about walking into a bank? Is the standard absolute perfection?
Not at all. Again, a lender does not need perfection. They know small businesses are messy. The goal is not to eliminate every conceivable flaw. The goal is to reduce the compounding effect. You have to isolate the risks so they don't trigger each other simultaneously.
So what does this all mean for you? If you're listening to this right now and you're realizing your business might look like a house of cards to a conservative underwriter, where do you start? How do you build a highly financeable business years before you ever actually need the money?
Hendershot lays out a really practical 5-step readiness playbook. You arrive at a financeable state by systematically addressing the areas of operational chaos. And the most urgent priority, step 1, is establishing financial clarity.
Which means moving beyond just looking at the bank balance to see if you can make payroll this week.
Much more than that. Lenders want to see 3+ years of clean, accrual basis financials.
Let's pause and define that, because accrual basis is a term that trips up a lot of early-stage entrepreneurs who run everything on a cash basis. What is the actual difference?
Well, cash basis accounting means you only record money when it literally hits your good account, and you record expenses only when you write the check. It's simple, sure, but it is deeply flawed for understanding a business's true health. Accrual accounting, on the other hand, means you record revenue when you actually earn it, when you deliver the service or the product, regardless of when the customer finally pays the invoice.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and you record expenses when you incur them, not when you finally pay the bill.
Why does a lender care so much about that distinction, though?
Because accrual accounting shows the true operating rhythm of the business. I mean, think about it. If you land a massive contract in October, but the client doesn't pay until January, cash accounting makes October look like a complete disaster and January look like a miracle. Accrual accounting smooths that out and shows the lender that you are consistently generating value. It proves you have a reliable engine. It also forces you to track accounts receivable and accounts payable accurately.
Okay, so the financials are clean and on an accrual basis.
Yeah.
But you mentioned owner dependency earlier. How do we practically solve for an owner who is the bottleneck for every single decision? That's step 2, right?
Yes. And this is notoriously the most difficult transition for an entrepreneur. Hendershot uses a fantastic metric to measure this called the 30-day absence test.
The 30-day absence test. How does that physically work?
You basically ask the owner, if you had to completely walk away from this business for 30 days tomorrow, no emails, no phone calls, no emergency text messages, absolutely zero decision making, what would happen? Would the team know how to fulfill orders? Would invoices get sent? Would payroll run? Most importantly, would the DSCR collapse?
Wow. For most small businesses, the place would burn to the ground in a week.
And that tells the lender that the collateral they are financing isn't actually a business. It's just a highly lucrative job that is entirely dependent on the personal energy of the founder. If the founder gets sick or sells the company, the asset is worthless.
So to pass the 30-day test, you have to move to step 3. Extract the knowledge from the founder's brain and turn it into actual systems.
Precisely. You have to document systems, build real, written, standard operating procedures, SOPs. You cannot rely on institutional knowledge that only exists in someone's head. You need an organizational chart that reflects true accountability, not just who happens to be yelling the loudest that day.
And that flows into step 4, how the business handled its daily operations. A lender hates walking into a business that feels like a perpetual fire drill.
Exactly. Lenders want to improve operational consistency. They want to see that you manage the business using key performance indicators, or KPIs. They want a management team that tracks metrics weekly and makes data-driven decisions, rather than a team that just scrambles to put numbers together when the bank asks for them. If your primary management strategy is emergency firefighting, a lender will assume you are eventually going to encounter a fire you cannot put out.
Which requires having a team capable of holding the hose. You can't just give your favorite employees fancy titles and hope for the best, which is step 5.
Right. Step 5 is strengthen leadership. You have to build a second layer of leadership with actual, real authority. They need the power to make decisions, spend money within budgets, and enforce policies without needing the owner's signature on every little thing. If the management team is paralyzed the moment the owner goes on vacation, the business is incredibly high risk.
To put a bow on all of this, the webinar actually includes a financing readiness checklist. It functions like a scorecard across various dimensions of the business: financials, operations, leadership, customer concentration. You rate yourself, and if you score between a 90 and 100, you're projecting strong financing readiness. The lender will likely fight to give you favorable terms, but if you score below a 60, you are flashing bright red warning lights. It's a really sobering way to look in the mirror.
It forces an owner to stop looking at their business through the optimistic, rose-colored glasses of a founder and start looking at it through the cold, calculating eyes of a conservative lender. At the end of the day, healthy businesses reduce uncertainty. And reduced uncertainty is the only currency that buys financing confidence.
That feels like the ultimate takeaway. Uncertainty is expensive. Predictability gets funded.
It does. And there is a final concept here that ties all of this together. It's a tension that every growing business eventually runs into, which Hendershot might call the founder's paradox.
The founder's paradox. Explain the mechanics of that.
Well, think about the traits that make someone a successful entrepreneur in those incredibly difficult, scrappy early days of a startup. They have to do everything themselves just to keep the lights on. They are the central hub for all decisions. They hold every customer relationship tightly. And as we discussed, they aggressively minimize taxes just to keep enough cash in the checking account to survive another month.
That is the textbook definition of grit.
Right.
That is how you force a business into existence.
It is. But here's the paradox. The exact same survival skills that allowed the business to survive the startup phase are the precise flaws that will make the business completely unfinanceable and unsellable in the maturity phase. Doing everything yourself creates fatal owner dependency. Minimizing taxes destroys your documented cash flow. The scrappy mindset eventually becomes the ceiling that the business cannot break through.
That is a tough pill to swallow. The survival skills of the startup become the fatal flaws of maturity. So the provocative question every owner has to ask themselves is, at what point do I need to stop acting like a scrappy founder and start acting like a corporate steward?
It's the most important psychological shift an owner can make because the lender holding the capital does not care how hard you work to paint the car. They only care if the engine is going to turn over when they hand the keys to someone else.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this conversation encourages you to view your own projects, your own businesses, or even your investments through that demanding, analytical, but ultimately rewarding lens of a commercial lender. Until next time, keep looking under the hood.